Hi, Rich Leiter here, and welcome to The Naked Booktuber. What do you do when you have achieved success? I mean, in our culture, in our society, it's all about working hard to achieve your dreams, whatever they may be. It's the American way. And for that matter, it's the Western European civilization way, too, by extension. What do you do when you finally got enough money, enough property, enough fame, when you've gotten whatever it is, all of the things that you've been striving for and which you have been told, either directly or implicitly, to go for by our society? What happens to you when you finally made it in a materialistic way? Well, this is the subject which is explored in Nicholas Roeg's movie Eureka. It was kind of hard to find this movie. I couldn't rent it. I had to fish around a lot to find a copy of it, but I finally did. And I was looking forward to seeing this movie for quite some time. And these are my feelings about it. First of all, let me give you a little bit of we'll give you the plot. The movie stars Gene Hackman as a gold prospector in Alaska who is obsessed with striking it rich. And he does. He strikes the mother lode, whatever that is. He is in this story immediately he's a rags to riches titan. I don't know how big his strike was, but it was big enough for him to be able to buy himself an entire island in the Caribbean, which is where he retires to. And for the rest of the movie, Gene Hackman, after he has achieved his materialistic dream, hands down he has achieved it, he just kind of rots. He has no more direction. And it's the story of a man who is in the process of having no more direction in his life and who just kind of slowly goes to pieces, I guess. He has a daughter played by Teresa Russell, a very young Teresa Russell. Teresa Russell has a boyfriend or a fiance, a young Rutger Hauer. Gene Hackman hates Rutger Hauer. He thinks that his daughter should drop this jerk and find somebody else. And a large part of the movie involves the tensions that are created by Gene Hackman's intense dislike of Teresa Russell's boyfriend. At the same time, on this Caribbean island that Gene Hackman has, there will be spoilers in this movie. At the same time that he is retired to his magnificent island in the Caribbean, and the name of the home he has given to this island, the name he has given to the home he has built on this island is Eureka. That's the name of the home, which reminds one, of course, of the home Xanadu, which Orson Welles, Citizen Kane, dubbed his home. So Gene Hackman's is called Eureka. And one realizes very early on in the course of the movie that Gene Hackman is being pressured by a mafia type, which is played by Joe Pesci, a young Joe Pesci. The cast is brilliant. Joe Pesci kind of plays, it's pretty obvious, although he's not named Meyer Lansky, but it's obvious that Joe Pesci is playing the mobster Meyer Lansky. And Joe Pesci is very, very eager to buy up some property on this Caribbean island owned by Gene Hackman so that he can build some casinos and begin gambling there. And Gene Hackman wants nothing to do with him. Gene Hackman, after he has made his money, wants absolutely nothing to do with anyone who wants to involve him in their business ventures at all. He just wants to be left alone. But of course, I guess you'd call it the plot of the movie, or one of the major plots, is how Joe Pesci, the mobster, keeps pressuring Gene Hackman to sign some papers to sell him a piece of the island so he can build his casinos there. And the lawyer, Gene Hackman / Meyer Lansky's lawyer, is played by a very young Mickey Rourke. So the cast is terrific, you know. But Gene Hackman does not want to do that. He doesn't agree. The tensions rise. And the movie ends basically by the death of Gene Hackman. He is murdered. And by the way, this movie, I understand, is based on the real life of a figure named Harry Oakes. Several books were written about Harry Oakes, and I think that this movie is not quite so loosely based on the character of Harry Oakes, who also died, who was murdered in a very grisly way. And to this day, nobody has found out who Harry Oakes' murderer was. So that's the plot of the movie. Now, as I say, the movie deals with the way that Gene Hackman just is living a kind of nihilistic, aimless life now that he has achieved his dreams. And that's the issue involved. And I think that's a very, very subtle and yet very, very important issue that I can't recall having really seen in any other movies. Not that they don't exist, but nothing comes to mind right now. It's a very fantastic issue to explore. Much in the way that Fellini explores in La Dolce Vita the issue of what does a person do, Marcello Mastroianni, what does a person do who wants to become an artist or fulfill his dreams, but he just doesn't have the ability, the wherewithal to do it. That's Marcello Mastroianni's story. He wants to be more than just a journalist, a paparazzi. He wants to do bigger things, but he just doesn't have the ability, the stuff it takes to do it. And we see what happens to Marcello Mastroianni in this movie. It's a very subtle theme, and yet it's a brilliant theme, which I so in a way, he's not really an artist manqué, Marcello Mastroianni. You wouldn't call him that because he's not painting or writing. But he would like to be a writer. So perhaps he is. He's working on some kind of a novel, I think, during the movie. So I guess you could call him an artist manqué. What happens to artist manqués who can't cross over, who can't cross that magical bridge to being real artists? In Eureka, it's a very similar theme. What happens when you've made it all? At one point, Gene Hackman says in the movie, he complains to his wife. He says, at one point, he says, I had it all, and now I just have everything. So he's now living a very empty life. He kind of reached his zenith when he was the gold prospector, when he was struggling to strike it rich. And once he did, it all went downhill for him spiritually. I think that this issue that I'm talking about, was actually stronger than the way it was executed in this movie. I felt that the movie was rather weak. Like I say, the issue is a strong issue. The way in which it's described is rather weak. And I'll tell you why. A lot of the movie, the external world that keeps pressuring Gene Hackman is basically crystallized in this figure of Joe Pesci / Meyer Lansky pressuring him to sell him land for his casino. That's it. That's the extent of the external world trying to get a piece of Gene Hackman. And I think there could have been a lot, and the rest of the movie basically involves his relationship with his daughter, Teresa Russell, and with this very shallow, empty person, Rutger Hauer. And I think too much of it was devoted to his family relationships, and not enough to the encroachment of the external world on Gene Hackman. For instance, I think that a lot more could have been done, showing the immense pressures that a person of wealth is subjected to by the external world. For instance, why didn't Nicholas Roeg, or I think it was Paul, is it named Paul Mayersberg, I think wrote the screenplay. Why didn't he have, in terms of the external world, why didn't he have the government, the United States government, or some other government, leaning on him, trying to get some money from him in taxes? Why wasn't he always trying to fend off some government trying to take a piece out of him, for instance? Why wasn't there a section of the movie where Gene Hackman is deluged by venture capitalists, people with no money but with a bright, slick idea who need funding? And maybe in the beginning of the movie, for instance, the way that I would have written it, in the beginning of the movie, Gene Hackman actually, has audiences with these venture capitalists, some of them, or Wall Street types, and they pitch him their ideas, and he says, "Get the hell out of here, get away from me." And as the film goes on, more and more venture capitalists try to take a piece out of him, and he gets more and more fed up with them, and eventually he gets extremely agitated and says, "Fuck off, all of you sharks and barracudas out there." But they never do. They keep trying to take a piece of him. Why wasn't there that, for instance? All of the usual things in the external world, all of the usual sharks. How about Big Pharma? Maybe Big Pharma might have contacted a person like Gene Hackman and asked him to invest in their wonderful new product that's going to cure cancer. Maybe. Something like that. There should have been more of all of the geopolitical shit that we all know about right now. Or perhaps maybe we could have had somebody from the U.S. contact Gene Hackman, the character played by Gene Hackman. His name, I think, is Jack. I forget his last name now. But contact Gene Hackman and pressure him to run for Congress, run for the Senate, or run for the House of Representatives. Kind of like a Jack Kennedy. This way they have a person of immense wealth. He can buy up all the votes. He could win the election, and then all of the people who put him up to this, well, they can get their share of they can feed off of him, these parasites. Why didn't he have something about that? All of the usual pressures that a person of wealth is subjected to in our toxic system. I'm not a wealthy person by any means. I'm a relatively poor person, but I would imagine that if you become a person of immense wealth, the world in general does not want to leave you alone at that point. They won't leave you alone. And for example, why didn't one of Gene Hackman's ex-girlfriends or lovers suddenly come out of the woodwork when he becomes a wealthy man and accuse him of rape, or try to get some money, sue him for some reason, and try to get a piece of his pie? Any of these things, there are so many more. Why didn't all of these toxic external world situations, why weren't they written into the script? I don't think that it was, I mean, that's what you want. You want to show how Gene Hackman, how a man of wealth is getting disgusted by the toxicity and the greed of the world. I mean, the film makes a big point of showing how how Gene Hackman, the gold prospector, is a self-made man. He says he didn't take a nickel from anyone else's sweat. He did it all himself. So the character portrayed in this movie is an extremely fiercely independent person of extremely high morals. He doesn't want anything to, if he didn't do it himself, he doesn't want anyone else to bother with him. He doesn't want any partners. He doesn't want any deals. He is a true idealist. So in the film, you're being shown what happens to an inflexible idealist who simply says, screw you to all of these toxic external pressures in the world designed to get a piece of his pie, to get some of his wealth, if not all of his wealth. He's fiercely independent, and when that happens to a person, they can't win. They cannot win. That's the takeaway I get from this film. And also from just experience in general, watching over the last 50 years situations in the real world for people who are fiercely independent. They are always destroyed. There are a lot more cockroaches in the world than there are lions. And the cockroaches always win, simply because they are cockroaches, and there are so many of them. You know, Julian Schnabel, the painter, and I guess director, but I'm thinking mostly painter, made a statement once, I hope I'm paraphrasing it correctly, about critics. He said that critics are like the flies buzzing around the tail of a lion. The artist is the lion, and the critics are just the flies buzzing around it. And I have to say, those are my sentiments exactly. However, we've gotten to the point now in our screwed up culture where the artist is no longer the lion. The roles have been reversed. The artist has now been reduced to the fly, buzzing around the tail of the critics. The critics now have all the power. The critics are the naysayers or the yay-sayers. Talent is not the main thing anymore. Merit is not the main thing anymore. That's only a part of it, and perhaps a small part of it. It's all of these external, extra artistic factors involved. And so the critics have come into the foreground. Look at the Salvador Mundi that was sold for $450 million. Who had the power? The critics had the power. The Martin Kemps, the Leonardo experts, they had the power. They were the ones who it was entrusted to determine whether this painting was a real Leonardo or not, whether it was worth $400 million or not. That's a lot of power to give to a critic who can't really do anything. And so the critics have become the kingmakers now. That's the external world, the world of the critics, for instance. So what was I trying to say here? Yeah, so all of these flies buzzing around Gene Hackman the lion, trying to get their piece of the pie, trying to control him. That's what the movie's about. But as I say, I don't think there were enough metaphorical flies and cockroaches in this movie to show the gradual disgust of Gene Hackman with the external world. I mean, there's no development of Gene Hackman, the gold prospector. He's a prospector, penniless. He strikes it rich, and from that point on, he just says to the world, "Get away from me. Get out of my face." And I think that was the main flaw of the movie. The movie should have devoted a lot more time to showing the gradual onslaught of all of these parasites and cockroaches and flies buzzing around Gene Hackman's tail. You want to see the buildup of his disgust. You want to see gradually how much the world encroaches upon him. And we didn't really get that. We only got one fly, one cockroach, one parasite in the person of Meyer Lansky / Joe Pesci. And that was the main problem I had with this movie that made it a weaker movie than it could have been. Less about the family, less about your family drama with Teresa Russell, your daughter, and Rutger Hauer, the boyfriend who you can't stand, and more about the external world. That was the pitfall for me of this movie. Now, there was a movie also directed by Nicholas Roeg called The Man Who Fell to Earth, starring David Bowie, which I saw, obviously. And I loved that movie from the very get-go. I mean, that movie did everything that Eureka did not do. You saw in a very, very methodical, brilliant, slow burn kind of way how David Bowie, I don't want to have to give the plot to that movie again, but it's basically the same kind of plot in a way. A man who amasses an enormous amount of wealth on planet Earth. And what happens to a person like that? We see how, little by little, in The Man Who Fell to Earth, he becomes imprisoned, and how the world at large, the government, the CIA, you name it, they will not allow him to amass as much wealth as he can because there's too much power. Of course, the real reason in The Man Who Fell to Earth why he's amassing his power is not just to amass power and money. He needs this money to build a spaceship to bring him back to his home world, so that he can, with water, because his planet is dying from lack of water. So he's doing it for a noble reason. But the world on Earth won't let him achieve his ends. They see a man who is achieving way, way too much power, and they block him. And he ends up, as the film, another spoiler, he ends up, as the movie progresses, he is reduced to being nothing more than an extremely wealthy alcoholic who realizes that the people on planet Earth just won't let him do what he set out to do. So the film The Man Who Fell to Earth and Eureka both have this in common. When you make too much money, when you have too much power, which money bestows upon you on this planet Earth, you cannot be independent. The world will not leave you alone. Unless you defend yourself, the world will destroy you. And that is the theme explored much more successfully in The Man Who Fell to Earth. Now, of course, there's one thing that, one issue, I'm thinking when I watched Eureka, one issue which was not addressed. It is true, that when a person amasses a lot of wealth, when they reach their goals materialistically, whatever materialistic goals they had, when they reach them, suddenly society no longer has a ready-made formula for how they should live their lives from that point on. And as we see, a person like that kind of dies. When the dream is dead, the person begins to die. When the struggle to amass wealth, one's materialistic aspirations, when that is reached, excuse me, a void is created. And a person does not know how to deal with that. A lot of millionaires have blown their brains out. We all know that. A lot of writers who have achieved success, artistic success, they go to Hollywood. They write screenplays. And that's the end of them. That's the end of them. Fame does that to people. When you're a famous person, when you become famous and you become wealthy, both, it's extremely difficult to keep growing. John Milton says in one of his poems, fame is the last infirmity of noble mind. It's extremely difficult when you've made it artistically, whether you're a painter or a writer or a composer, to have the fire keep burning within you, to not just coast on your laurels and begin to rot. So fame, this is one of the timeless themes, I think. What fame and material wealth does to you, what a hollow victory it is if that's all you're looking for. The issue which is not addressed in this movie is that the tragedy people have who achieve wealth and fame, success, is that their wealth and their fame and their success is purely materialistic. You should have a goal, you should have dreams, but you should always keep going closer and closer to your dream, always exploring it closer. This is what true artists do. I mean, think of a person like Beethoven. Now, Beethoven was not a wealthy person. He was very famous during his lifetime, but he did not achieve material success by any means. He had to rely on patrons to be supported. Beethoven did not rest on his laurels. Beethoven kept exploring himself throughout his life. He kept growing because his desire, the thing that made him tick, was not something based on material wealth and success. No true artist ever does what he does for material success. And the ones who keep trying to grow artistically, in a way, artistic success or the lack of it is irrelevant to them. Look at Rembrandt. I mean, Rembrandt had it all, and then he lost it all. And Rembrandt just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper. Rembrandt didn't just become an old, bitter man like this character in Eureka. So the truly successful person is the one who just wants to keep going inward. And when you want to keep going inward, well, there's no limit. There's no end to it. And that person will always be a success. That person will always be, I can't say that person will be happy, but that person will always be challenged. and will always find life exciting. there is quite an abyss between a person who looks inward and is excited about what he finds inside himself from a person who merely wants material success. I mean, I'm not trying to denigrate the enormous power that money has in our society at all. I mean, I've worked my whole life. I certainly know the importance of money, the value of a dollar. And this has been said over and over and over again. This is not an original thought, Well, what's the cliche? Money doesn't buy love. Money doesn't buy happiness. It's true. Most people, especially young people, cannot see this. It's impossible for them to see it. Even if a person like Gene Hackman warned them about the dangers of putting all of your energies into material success, even if he said it to them flat out and said to these young people, look at me, I'm an example, look what it's done to me, they literally wouldn't hear him. It's just the way it is in life. Most people cannot understand that. Material success will leave you having everything except yourself. So that's my movie review of Eureka. Thank you.